The wind that night was cruel, a living thing that screamed across the open plains and clawed at every loose board on the old ranch house. Jack Hollister had seen storms before, but this one felt different, wild, restless, like the desert itself was warning him to stay inside. He tossed another log into the fire, the flames throwing nervous shadows across the walls, when his old horse out in the barn gave a sharp, panicked neigh. Jack grabbed his rifle, muttering under his breath, and stepped out into the howling dark. The rain came sideways, thick as nails, blinding him as he fought his way toward the barn. Lightning split the sky, and in that flash he saw them. 2 figures collapsed in the mud beside his corral, tangled in torn blankets and soaked to the bone. Apache women, sisters, by the look of them, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other leaner, but fierce, even in weakness. Jack lowered his rifle slowly, instinct whispering caution, but humanity shouting louder. "Hey!" he called out over the wind, but neither moved. He dropped to his knees beside them, rolling the taller one gently onto her back. Her pulse was steady, but her skin burned with fever. "Damn it," he muttered, scooping the smaller one into his arms and dragging both toward the barn. The horses stamped nervously as he laid the women on dry hay, covering them with his coat. Their faces were striking proud cheekbones, hair like black silk plastered to their foreheads, and tribal paint faintly smudged beneath the dirt. Jack had lived near Apache lands long enough to know trouble when he saw it, but he'd also seen what starvation and sickness could do to anyone. He stoked the lantern, found some water, and began to clean their wounds. Hours passed before the younger one stirred, her dark eyes snapping open like knives. She sat up fast, reaching for something that wasn't there, a knife, a weapon, a memory. "Easy," Jack said, hands raised. "You're safe." Her gaze locked on his, sharp and suspicious. "Where is my sister?" "Right there," he said, nodding toward the tall woman still sleeping. "She's alive. Fever's bad, though." The girl hesitated, scanning his face for deceit. Then, slowly, she exhaled. "You should not have helped us," she said quietly. "If they find us here, they will kill you, too." Jack frowned. "Who?" The wind answered first, a low, haunting whistle that crawled under the door. "White traders," she whispered. "They took our tribe's horses. We took them back. They hunt us now." Jack cursed under his breath, realizing what that meant. The outlaws who'd been terrorizing the nearby valleys. He'd heard of them. Ruthless men who didn't care who they killed, Apache or rancher alike. "You're staying," he said firmly. "Storm's not over, and neither is your fever." The young woman blinked, as if the concept of mercy was foreign to her. "Why?" she asked. Jack gave a weary half-smile. "Because if I left you out there, I'd hear my mother's voice in the thunder for the rest of my life." The morning after the storm broke, quiet and gold, sunlight spilling across the mesa like forgiveness after sin. Jack Hollister woke to the low hum of life, returning the smell of wet earth, the creak of wood drying in the heat, and the sound of soft voices from the barn. When he stepped outside, coffee steaming in one hand and rifle in the other, he found the 2 Apache sisters awake, sitting cross-legged in the hay, like spirits from an older world. Talila, the taller one, looked stronger now, her eyes bright with both gratitude and caution. Saya sat beside her, sharpening a knife with calm precision, every scrape against the blade echoing in the silence. You're both lucky that fever broke, Jack said, tipping his hat. Another night out there and I'd be digging graves instead of fences. Talila's lips twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a frown. Then we owe you our lives. Jack shrugged. I wasn't counting. He turned to leave, but Saya's voice stopped him. You fed us, she said flatly. You could left us to die. Why? He paused at the doorway. Guess I just don't like seeing good people hunted down by worse ones. Talula stood, her height filling the space, her shadow stretching across the straw. Then we will stay, she said simply. Jack blinked, half amused. Stay. No offense, ma'am, but this ain't a boarding house. You heal, you ride on. Safer that way. The sisters exchanged a glance, one that spoke in silence, in understanding deeper than words. Saya sheathed her knife and said, The desert has decided. We stay. Before Jack could argue, Talula added, You saved us. Now the land says we protect you. Jack frowned, confused and slightly uneasy. Protect me from what? From what's coming, Saya replied, her tone like thunder before rain. Jack sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, I appreciate the offer, but I've lived here 10 years without anyone's help. Talula stepped closer, her gaze steady. Then for the first time in 10 years, you will not live alone. That line hit him harder than he wanted to admit. For a man who'd buried his wife young and talked more to his horses than people, loneliness had become as natural as breathing. And now, in one strange sunrise, it was gone. By midday, the sisters were working like they'd always belonged there, Saya tending the horses, whispering in Apache to calm them, Talula lifting hay bales like they were feathers. Jack watched from the fence, half in awe. The ranch that had always felt too big for one man suddenly felt alive again. But by sunset, as the sky turned blood orange, that uneasy feeling crept back in. He saw movement on the far ridge, distant riders, glinting in the last light. 4, maybe 5. Not ranchers, not neighbors. Trouble. The same outlaws, he guessed, who'd hunted the sisters before. Saya saw them too. They've found our trail, she said. Jack loaded his rifle, voice low. Then we make sure they regret it. Talula stood behind him, tall and unflinching, her hair whipping in the wind. No, she said. You saved us. By the time the sun dipped behind the red hills, the valley had fallen into that strange, silent stillness that always came before blood was spilled. Jack Hollister leaned against the porch rail, his Winchester resting across his knees, eyes fixed on the distant ridge where 5 dark figures lingered like vultures, waiting for the world to die. The Apache sisters stood behind him, quiet but alert, their movements deliberate and measured. Talula had fashioned a spear from an old fence post and a hunting knife, her strength terrifying and graceful all at once, while Saya crouched low, painting dark streaks across her face with soot from the fire. They're watching, Jack murmured. They'll come after dark. Talula nodded slowly. Yes, coyotes always do. Her voice carried the calm of someone who had seen too much to ever fear again. Jack exhaled, glancing at her profile against the fading light. She looked like she belonged to the desert itself, carved from dust and memory. You sure about staying? He asked. If you go now, you could still reach the canyon before night. Saya's eyes flicked toward him, cold but not unkind. You saved us, rancher. Now we stay. That is the way. Jack opened his mouth to argue, but stopped when he saw the first flicker of lantern light moving down the ridge. The riders were coming. The sisters moved like shadows, silent and efficient. Saya doused the fire, while Talyula led the horses into the corral and secured the gates. The only sound was the distant creak of saddles and the low murmur of men's voices carried by the wind. Jack crouched behind a stack of crates, checking his rifle one last time. "Outlaws," he whispered. "Same ones." Saya nodded. "The same. The one with the scar. He killed our brother." A cold weight settled in Jack's chest. "Then, this time, we finish it." When the first rider crossed the fence line, the moon broke through the clouds, silver and merciless. The men spread out, guns drawn, eyes gleaming with greed. "Come out, half-breeds," one shouted. "We just want the horses." Jack fired first, one clean shot that dropped the man before he finished the sentence. The others scattered, cursing and firing blindly into the dark. Bullets cracked through the night, splintering wood and kicking up dust. Saya moved like lightning, her knife flashing as she slipped through the shadows behind the barn. One outlaw screamed, a raw human sound that echoed off the rocks, then silence. Talyula stood in the open calm as the moon, hurling her makeshift spear through the darkness. It struck a rider clean through the chest, lifting him off his horse before he hit the ground with a dull thud. Jack fired again, his pulse steady, his instincts old but sharp. 2 men left. They circled, spooked and desperate. "There's 3 of 'em," one yelled. "No," the other stammered, eyes wide. "There's more. I swear I saw others in the shadows." The desert was playing tricks, but it didn't matter. Fear was already killing them faster than bullets could. Saya emerged from the dark, her face streaked in ash and blood, eyes blazing like a spirit's. "You came for death," she said, in a low, trembling whisper. "You found it." The last outlaw turned to run, his horse shrieking. The next morning rose pale and slow over Mercy Hill, the light spilling across the valley like it was trying to wash away the sins of the night before. Smoke still curled from the barn roof where stray bullets had torn through the shingles, and the smell of gunpowder lingered in the cool air. Jack Hollister stood on the ridge overlooking the field where the bodies lay buried, 5 fresh mounds of dirt, silent and accusing. The desert had claimed them, as it always did, without prayer or name. The Apache sisters worked beside him, silent as ghosts, their faces hard but eyes distant, haunted. Talyula pressed her palm against the last grave and whispered something in her language, her words carried away by the wind. Saya stood a few steps back, her knife still hanging at her belt, the blade stained and unclean. "You should rest," Jack said softly, voice rough from the long night. "You both earned it." Saya didn't look up. "Rest?" Jack frowned, not understanding. Talyula rose, brushing the dust from her skirt. "She means the land remembers blood, always." Jack looked out toward the far mesa, where the horizon shimmered with heat, though the morning was still cold. "If that's true," he said, "then this place must hate me. I've spilled more blood than I've planted seed." Talyula turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Maybe that's why the desert sent us to you." Her words hit him like thunder rolling over dry ground. For the first time since the storm, he felt something stir inside him, not fear, but the old ache of belonging. He had lived half his life trying to keep the world out, And somehow these two women had walked straight through his walls like they were never there. By noon, the ranch had returned to its rhythm. The horses fed, fences mended, smoke rising from the chimney again. But something had changed in the air. Jack noticed how the sisters moved, always scanning the horizon, always listening, as if they sensed a shadow still following them. When he asked, Saya only said, "The men we killed were not all, there are others. And their leader. He wears a black coat and rides with no sound." Jack felt a chill despite the heat. "You mean the man who sent them?" She nodded once. "He will come for what he thinks belongs to him." That night, Jack sat by the fire alone, his coffee growing cold as he watched the flames twist and sigh. Talila joined him quietly, her steps soft against the floorboards. "You're thinking too loud," she said. Jack smiled faintly. "Just trying to figure out what kind of trouble I invited to my ranch." Tallulah studied him for a long moment, then said, "You didn't invite it. You just didn't turn it away." Her gaze softened. "Where we come from, a man who shares his fire shares his fate." He looked into her eyes, calm, ancient, and full of things he'd never understand, and for a heartbeat, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was heavy with something unspoken. Outside, the coyotes began to sing, their cries sharp against the dark. Saya appeared at the doorway, bow in hand, her face pale beneath the moonlight. "They're here," she whispered. The moon hung low over the desert, pale and watchful, casting long shadows across the valley as the riders descended from the ridge. Jack Hollister could hear the distant rhythm of hooves, slow, deliberate, like a funeral drum that had been beating for years, just waiting for this night. The Apache sisters stood at his side, their silhouettes sharp against the firelight. Tallulah's grip tightened around her spear, while Saya's bow was already drawn, her eyes glowing with that fierce, quiet focus of someone who'd been hunted too long. The air itself seemed to hold its breath when the first rider appeared, a tall man cloaked in black, his hat pulled low, his horse as dark as the sky behind him. He stopped just beyond the corral fence, his men fanning out behind him like wolves in formation. "Hollister," he called, his voice smooth, almost polite, but carrying that edge that made the skin crawl. "You've got something that belongs to me." Jack stepped forward, rifle in hand. "Don't think so." The man in black tilted his head slightly, the firelight catching the faint scar that cut across his jaw. "Two Apache women," he said evenly. "Fugitives, thieves, murderers. You're hiding them." Jack's jaw tightened. "They're not yours, and they're no thieves." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You've got no idea who they are, do you?" He nodded toward the sisters. "Ask them. Ask them what they did before you became their savior." Jack glanced at Tallulah and Saya, both still, but their silence said everything. He could feel the truth hanging there, heavy and dangerous. "Whatever they did," he said quietly, "they're done running." The man in black chuckled, the sound cold as gunmetal. "No one's done running in this land, rancher. Especially not them." He turned his horse slightly, the movement slow and deliberate. "You killed 5 of my men last night. That debt don't wash away with rain." Tallulah stepped forward then, her voice low and steady. "Your men took from us first. They killed our brother. You wear his knife at your belt." The man's hand brushed the hilt at his side, and for the first time his smirk faltered. He was a fighter, he said. Like you, he was a child, Talila whispered. And that was the moment everything broke. The man's eyes hardened. Enough talk. He raised his hand, and his men moved as one, guns flashing, horses screaming, the night exploding into chaos. Jack fired from the porch, the crack of his Winchester echoing off the canyon walls. Saya loosed her arrows in rapid rhythm, each finding its mark with eerie precision. Talila charged forward, fearless and terrible, her spear striking through the smoke and dust like lightning itself. The man in black fired twice. One bullet grazed Jack's shoulder, spinning him back against the railing. The other tore through the barn door, showering sparks. But then Talila was on him. She ripped him from his saddle, the two of them crashing into the dirt, his revolver spinning away into the dark. He swung his knife, her brother's knife, slicing a line across her arm, but she didn't stop. With a roar that echoed through the valley, she drove the spear through his chest, pinning him to the earth. Silence fell. Even the horses. The dawn came slow over the wide New Mexico plains, its pale light crawling across the blood-soaked earth like a tired ghost. The ranch lay quiet now, broken fences, smoldering hay, the air heavy with the metallic scent of gunpowder and dust. Jack Hollister stood near the corral, his arm bandaged, his face drawn and hollow, staring out toward the horizon where the man in the black coat had fallen. He had seen death before, too much of it, but this time felt different. This wasn't victory. It was survival with a price carved deep into the soul. Talila and Saya were by the stream, washing the dirt and blood from their hands, their movements silent, reverent. The water shimmered red for a moment before turning clear again. Jack watched them, feeling something shift inside him, something between respect and sorrow. These weren't just the Apache girls he had taken in months ago. They were warriors of a dying world, survivors of cruelty that most men couldn't even imagine. He had thought he'd saved them once. Now he knew the truth. They had saved him. The ranch had always been his refuge, his small claim of peace in a land built on blood and loss. But now it stood as something else, a symbol of what could rise from ruin. Saya walked over, her long braid still wet, her eyes reflecting the pale fire of morning. "We will leave soon," she said softly. "This place, it belongs to the wind now." Jack shook his head slowly. "You built this with me. It's yours too." Talila joined them then, wrapping a worn blanket around her shoulders. "No," she said, her voice steady but sad. "Our people are ghosts here, Jack. If we stay too long, the desert will take us to." For a long moment, none of them spoke. The only sound was the wind rustling through the mesquite trees, whispering the names of the dead. Then Jack walked to the barn and came back with something wrapped in cloth, the knife that had belonged to Talula's brother, cleaned and polished. He handed it to her with both hands. "He deserves to rest with his people," he said quietly. Talula took it, her fingers trembling just slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." She looked around the ranch, the house, the broken corral, the land that had sheltered them. "When we came here, we thought we'd lost everything, but we found something instead. A man who saw us, not as enemies, not as savages, but as family." Jack swallowed hard. "Family's all we've got left out here." The sisters saddled their horses as the sun rose higher, painting the desert in gold. Jack walked beside them to the edge of the ridge. From up there, The valley stretched endless, a sea of light and memory. Saya turned in her saddle and smiled faintly. "If you ever need us," she said, "just listen to the wind." And then they were gone, riding east toward the horizon, their figures small against the vast, glowing plain. Jack stood there long after they disappeared, the sound of their horses fading into silence. He turned back to his ranch, the scars of the night still fresh but somehow sacred now, a reminder that life, even in its harshest form, still had meaning. The wind rose again, sweeping over the land, carrying whispers only the old desert could understand. It carried the names of the fallen, the cries of the brave, and somewhere in that endless echo was the laughter of two Apache sisters and the man who had once saved them and whom they had saved in return. And as the first heat of morning touched his face, Jack finally smiled. The desert remembered, and so would he.